Unusual in the sense that we're going to have to fit little pieces of different things together. I'm also not sure that it's going to take up the usual amount of time. One thing we have to do is we have to watch something about the hero's journey, because one of the sort of frameworks we use for going through this book is the framework of the hero's journey. Which originates with Joseph Campbell, who's coming out of, he's going to be very interested in anthropology, sociology, and literature, right? But he thinks that in the structure of human knowledge and human storytelling, human art across civilizations and across time, that there are these recurring points. And this story fits very nicely into what he uncovers. And I think it also helps us to pull out what's transcendent in what we're doing. So we're going to watch that by watching a little video about the hero's journey and Star Wars, my personal favorite Star Wars. So, but before that, we're going to have a little foray into some history and some Arendt. Again, Arendt is an Aristotelian, in my opinion. You could put her in with the neo-Aristotelians. I don't think she'd say that, but I think a lot of the spirit of Aristotle's there. And in that sense, she's a very nice companion for us as we're embarking on this unified picture, right, of trying to understand the kid in Blood Meridian through the things we've learned about Aristotle. We're only going to talk about one concept with her, and that concept is natality. So I'd write that down. I'd also take out a sheet of paper and I'd write the word natality is the focus of class today on a separate page with your name. That way I can take it up from you as a quiz.
Natality?
Yeah, N. I'll write it down for you. N-A-T-A-L-I-T-Y. Natality. It's just a small little concept. It's a huge concept, but I mean, small period of time that we'll talk about it for, right? Before we slip into the hero's journey part. I don't know if you guys remember back when we were reading Socrates' Apology. One of the things I was really at pains to express, and I thought you guys did a very good job with this, excuse me. Oh, thanks. Is Socrates has multiple arguments going on in the Apology. Of course, part of them are, related to the particular charges that the Athenians are bringing against him. But one of the things that I was really impressed that you guys picked up on is the status or the centrality of fear of death to his argument. Do you remember that? You know, on the one hand, we see that he's not scared of death in the way we might expect, because he's almost sort of like, he's engaging in this trial in a way where he is trying to give a justification of himself and his ways and to leave something behind to guide and strengthen Athens. But he's not doing any of the things you would expect him to do inside the context of the trial to stay alive, to survive. And at the end, when he gets the opportunity to work on offering a sentence, right, that he could have the death penalty, and then there's a moment in their procedure where the person who's convicted gets to suggest another outcome, another punishment. He says, you should feed me every day, you know, in the middle of the town, the way you feed your champions. And he knows that there's no way that's going to happen. So in a way, he's ensuring his death. So we can tell from his particular behavior that he's not doing anything to stave death off. It also seems that he is maybe causing his death by giving that other potential punishment. People expected he'd say exile, right? And then, you know, it seems like it's a political trial. They don't really want to kill him necessarily, not a good enough number of them. So what they'd like to do is exile him into another place. And even at the end, you see they're basically leaving the jail door open for him to escape. But he's not afraid of death. It even seems that he's bringing about his death. And in the apology, he spends a lot of time explaining why we shouldn't be afraid to die. Do you remember that argument? You have it? Okay, why don't you pull it out? Because this is useful. Yeah.
So compared to the bad things which I know are bad, I will never fear flee the things about which I do not know whether they even happen to be good.
Good, thank you. Can I see that? Can I read it too? Okay, great. I love it. Okay, so compared to the bad things which I know are bad, I will never fear or flee the things about which I do not know whether they even happen to be good. What did that mean to you?
I like that he just says there's plenty to fear from what we can already see. Why would I fear something I haven't even seen or know nothing about?
Okay, good, right? So one thing he can say is, look, there's all these things that I do know to fear on earth. If I should die, I have no idea what that would be like. And he offers two possibilities of what awaits us after death.
Heaven or a big good nap.
Yeah, heaven or a big good nap. I love that way of putting it, right? He says, either you're going to be in another world united with these things that are good and these people that have come before you, or you're just going to be in a state of peace and rest. And none of that scares him. What does scare him? What does he say does make him fear?
Going against his morals.
Going against his morals. Very good. And in the apology, he talks about one way that he can know his morals or what we'd later refer to as conscience is through this daemon, right? That tells him that's not a good thing to do, as opposed to telling him what to do. It says that's not a good thing to do. Why is the fear of rejecting his morals or breaking his morals what he considers to be very bad or very frightening?
It's the only thing you have control over.
Okay, so this is one interesting thing, like from the perspective of human freedom. He does say in the apology, there's none of us are going to escape death. We are all going to die. Nothing we do will stop that we are mortal. We might be able to escape a particular moment or manner of death, but death awaits us all. What we do have some control over is what we do and what actions where we have agency is whether we choose to do justice or injustice. So he frames it exactly that way. We don't have control over whether or not we die. And in that sense, how can you say that this is something I need to be preoccupied with? I need to be making the center of my life. What I do have control over is my actions, and whether my actions redound to what's good or what's bad. So excellent. What's another reason do you think that not being virtuous is the thing he thinks we should really fear? He says death can't really hurt us. Okay, if what death leads to is either this long rest or this heaven, right? That's not a harm. What can harm us? Yes?
Because of the fear of it is what's harming us.
Okay, fantastic. Good. So in reality, the thing that really should scare us, because it can cause harm, is the idea or the possibility that we will commit injustice. Because he thinks when you commit injustice, it harms others and it harms your own soul. Okay, this, and I write this down, this is the real harm. Death is not a harm. Doing injustice harms your own soul and harms others. And that's the thing to really fear. But, as you point out, what is so wrong with Athens, an ongoing sustained critique in the Apology, is he basically is saying the city itself, the democracy, is in thrall to the fear of death. Why do the Athenians commit injustice? Is it because they're like, ooh, we love injustice? Yes.
I know in Rome right now what's going on where I'm at. They literally will kick people out of the country. Not even if they are good at policy, but just if they think that they're going to go against them and kill them.
Right.
So they're just getting rid of good politicians because they'll think that they might turn armies on them and kill them.
Good. Right. So in the podcast, in the History of Rome podcast, you're at this point right now where this paranoia.
So then you just end up with yes men.
Yes, good. And so is Rome going to be able to rule itself well? No, it's this fear of death is causing them to run out some of their best men, their best leaders, and who's left behind? Good. Athens, it's kind of an analogous thing, I think, Socrates hints to in the Apology. It's in this city-state and their democracy, what scares them about Socrates sort of influencing the young people into questioning isn't impiety, because he sort of establishes that he doesn't say that there aren't any gods. In fact, he very clearly says that, the God has this nature, the God has that nature. The problem is that he's destabilizing the political order built around the particular gods of Athens. And not only do you have the problem, however that relates to mortality in the moment itself, right? But also he's basically accusing his accusers of, you're scared that if the Athens that you've created in the institutions and teachings that it has right now is not transmitted completely intact to the next generation, you see that as a strike against your only chance at immortality. You don't actually care that Athens become better, You don't actually care that Athens becomes more just. What you care about is that Athens remembers you, and it remembers you and the institutions that you shaped and you threw yourself into in the way that you expect it to outlive you. Why? Because you're scared of dying, and your fear of death has moved you away from being able to recognize anything I say that could be useful to our city. And the suggestion really is that any form of corrupt politics, whether it's this part of the History of Rome podcast that you're in right now, or it's this example with Athens, you could think of any number of historical moments, and current moments even possibly. The allegation from Socrates is that corrupt politics comes from fear of death. It's humans trying to have control over something they cannot control, trying to use politics to make them immortal, and being willing ultimately to use any means to do that. The fear of death makes people tyrannical. Okay, the fear of death makes people tyrannical. That's one of the core teachings of the apology. And the idea is when you can learn not to make fear of death the commander of your life, is when you can really begin to live, right? Is when you can really begin to live. Now, different thinkers that we've spent time with this semester have different, we've been able to tie this insight into our time with Augustine, with Hamlet, with Machiavelli, all of these things. But I just thought I'd throw out there, generally speaking, a lot of politics or political philosophers take in some way or another the navigation of or the fear of death or the centrality of the fear of death to be a central fact of human life. So Hobbes very explicitly does this. Hobbes is a social contract theorist. He wrote the Leviathan. You may know of him. He very consciously erects his entire political system, right, as a way of staving off death. And this makes sense because he says, I was born a twin of fear. He was born in a moment of war and destruction, and his whole life has been focused on staying alive.
They get born ready to fight.
Yes, it's exactly right. Like when we ended class last time, one of the things you brought up is like when you have people that are born into contexts that are really stressful, whether these are stressful for social, political reasons, or they're just personally stressful, that we can see that the child that comes to into the world that way and that grew in the mother's tummy in that time of stress, that they come out having already been, I guess you might say, formed to react in ways to preserve themselves, maybe more angry.
They literally can't help it.
Yes, right. It's a type of programming. And people who are interested in epigenetics talk about this kind of thing too. And it's still an area of science we don't have a lot of knowledge about, but our brains are habituated, even in the womb. So, you could say, Heidegger talks about the central fact of human life being what he calls being toward death. Marx is really focused on labor, right? And labor, of course, is something you do that defines us, right? And he's trying to make it more freeing in his estimation. But it's still a realm of necessity, right? Nietzsche is also interested in freedom, and getting away from necessity, but how does he focus on trying to bring that into being? A lot of times through power, right? Through wielding power. The point of all of this is to say that after Socrates, a lot of the preoccupation of political philosophy is navigating the fear of death. It is trying to stay alive. It is trying to survive in scarcity, in necessity. This is where Arendt's concept of natality comes in for us, I think. Okay, a lot of political philosophy is about death, about war, security, survival, catastrophe, and I'm not saying that that's bad. I'm also not saying that political philosophy shouldn't think about these things. But Arendt is kind of bringing us into a different place where she's saying, what if the thrust of politics or the core of politics was based on birth? That's where the term natality comes from, natal, right? You say someone's in the neonatal unit at the hospital. Nativity comes from the root of the same word, right? Natality. What if politics was based on birth? Meaning, what if instead of the contrast I've offered you so far, political philosophy was based on new people, new actions, constantly arising in the world and constantly arriving in the world. Think about the moment that you realized you didn't have to become the person that you were expected to be. Or think about how when you wake up this morning or you woke up this morning, you don't have to be the person that you were the day before. I mean, it's a thought I've had a lot in my life. And it's not even to say like that the person I was the day before was horrible or something. But every day is a new start. Every day is a new beginning. If the day before, when I went to bed, I was exhausted and certain things had happened in the day or I'd done certain things, the morning yielded something new. I wasn't fated to whatever yesterday had been. The simple definition of natality is just the human capacity to begin something new. And that something new that can be begun, is something that no one can really predict. We're not like the sun in the sense that, you say the sun behaves this way at night, it will behave this way in the morning. Humans always retain something more independent in themselves. Humans have a capacity to begin something new that can't be predicted. For Arendt, natality could be thought of in this way, because it's a very vague, theoretical, abstract concept. But if we try to bring it down into more concrete things, it could be every time a person starts a movement, and you could think of, if you wanted to, a political movement, but you could also just think literally of a physical movement, right? If you're someone who does any kind of sport, if you're someone who does any type of physical activity or dance, or even if you're going to do a physical activity or a dance for the first time and you've never done anything like that before, the first movement you make to do that is something totally new in the world. I used to dance, and I remember I would spot, right? And when you turn, you'd spot, and spotting is where you see a place on the wall or something in front of you that you're focusing on, so that when you turn, your head will keep the spot and you'll come as close as possible, right, to staying in line. I'm not able to do this as well as I could when I was younger. But every time you start the turn, every time you find a spot, even if you're spotting in the same spot, that is a totally new movement. That is a totally new moment. There's no way it is identical to the previous turn that you took. Even if you want it to be literally identical, it's not. It can't be. You can talk about when a human says something completely unexpected. Like, we've all had moments where we're talking to someone and we see their face after we say something and they're like, wait, what? Like, they did not expect that to come out of your mouth. Or we've been on the receiving end of it. Like, President Trump's going to give a speech tonight and all of the big networks are supposed to stop, right? They've said they're going to carry it. This is unusual in America. And so, because most of the time we do have speeches like this, but they'd be planned far in advance, right? And they're a part of some sort of ritual. So everyone's going to be listening and wondering, what is he going to say? It will be unexpected. It will be new. When you forgive someone for Arendt, that is an example of natality. That is something that deviates from the expected, that brings new potential, new possibilities into the world. You're not stuck in the mode of vengeance. Everybody knows what the mode of vengeance is. Everybody knows what to expect in terms of revenge and retaliation. Forgiveness really puts something new into play. When you break a pattern in your family, if you have inside your own family a pattern of anything, I mean, it can be, I'm just using dramatic versions, but let's say that there's been patterns of abuse or patterns of neglect. Like, when you're the person who says, first of all, you can recognize that this has been happening and you can call it what it is, and then you can try to do something different. Whatever that different thing is, that's natality for Arendt. And you could extrapolate from that, from being a cycle breaker in your family to being a cycle breaker in your political community, a cycle breaker in your nation. Someone who invents something embodies Arendtian natality. Someone who refuses to go along with something they're expected to do. Resistance of some type is a form of natality. Why? Because it's an action that's unexpected, unpredicted. If politics is based on this kind of thing, Arendt thinks that it will become an area of life and an area of thought where we don't spend all of our time just focusing on how not to die. And that humans will be thought of not as creatures who are born to die, but as humans who are born and reborn. This isn't to say that history doesn't have structures and it doesn't have trends, right? But that the new and unexpected always arrives within that. If you're a first-gen kid going into college, if you're someone who can recognize something unhealthy in your own family, any of those things, that's the start of a new journey. The hero's journey is always about natality. That's one of the reasons it fits nicely with what we're doing now. Yes, you had something to say?
I was going to say, it's not just progressive thinking instead of traditional thinking.
So isn't natality, as we're talking about it, just progressive thinking rather than traditional thinking? Can you say a bit more? This is a good contrast, or a good question.
Like the official whatever they're supposed to be. Like
Right.
Progressive means like you look towards growth, and then traditional is like just try to stick with what's working.
Right. Good. Okay, so how is this different than, and let me know if I'm putting words in your mouth. How is this different from a mindset that focuses on maintaining or preserving versus a mindset that focuses on change and growth?
Well, I mean, we talked about it before, where it's like, I forgot which philosopher we were talking about it. Like, you should always look for knowledge or whatever. Look for knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
You should always be trying to grow and get better. People get stuck.
Good. And people get stuck, and so I think, so like, for example, with Socrates, right? This idea that you engage in the practice of philosophy, not because everything that you already know is wrong, but because there are things in what you already know. If you just stop there, the horizon of your knowledge stops too.
You don't know everything.
Yes, you don't know everything, and you have to admit that you don't know everything to continue to learn, to expand, which isn't to say that what you knew before isn't real. I think this is a really good connection to natality, and I definitely think that Socrates and his method is something she's trying to model. In a way where this is part of why she's pushing so hard against philosophers who are thinking about using philosophy for the sake of navigating death. She kind of wants to turn all the attention of that power and that action toward natality and growth and new things. But I think that's a good way of putting it. The one thing I'd say, and this isn't a correction, but this is an opportunity for me to kind of bring out what I think is an important fact generally, is that even in her discussion of natality isn't a rejection of what's before. I'm not saying that that's what you're saying.
It's just don't confine.
It's being able to get beyond what's before, right? It's being able to get beyond what's before. So it doesn't mean that it's the same thing as making everything new, but it's like we said when we gave the sort of simple definition about it. It's the human capacity for doing new things, okay? And even when you're born into a world of networks and relationships and things that already exist. Like your mom is a certain person. She's made certain choices. Now, I don't even mean like moral, I just mean choices. Like, she lives in this city, right? At this time in history. Well, she doesn't control where she lives in history, but like where she lives in time, what she inhabits in time is going to mean that her world is filled with certain things, right? And certain choices. You're born into that, right? It's not like all that goes away by you being born. What you do with that, how you inhabit that, is where the newness arises. I don't know if that makes sense. And so I'm glad for the point made, because it gives me a chance to talk a little bit about the interpretive danger of thinking about natality as
They also
making new
living
things.
without mental restraints. Obviously, don't go crazy, but like always know that you have the capacity to do more.
The capacity to do more, I think, is exactly right. It's the thing that you're meant to focus in on with this concept.
It's hard because it's humbling.
It is very humbling. And I think when you're reading Blood Meridian and you're watching the journey of the kid, one of the things that McCarthy does well is he shows you all the things that the kid is up against, so to speak, all the things outside of his control, all the things he hasn't made, right, that he has to deal with. And the question is, can he do anything new? Right? And it's kind of interesting that that question is being explored in the context of what are essentially the borderlands. Because when the text is taking place, it's happening in the borderlands, in this contested space, right, between Mexico, America, Texas as a nation, and between different indigenous populations in the book, specifically the Comanche. Territorially speaking, right, this is an area fraught with history, but also fraught with change and with things being brought into connection with each other and collision with each other. Yeah, big context of the book is what I think you could effectively, historically say is a kind of turf war. Yes?
I also feel like, so death is kind of like an unknown in a way, and being afraid of death is like humans being afraid of the unknown, and that's what they thought in Socrates. And then mortality kind of being like how you say being born again, or like discovering being born into the new world again. And it's kind of like the opposite of what you fear the most, and that's the unknown.
Ooh, I love that. That's brilliantly said. Yes, this is a very good point too. Socrates identifies, fear of the unknown and fear of death as being the same thing, right? That's a big part of his analysis, and he thinks it's that fear that's basically paralyzing and corrupting the Athenians. And you've done a great job of pointing out that natality is the exact opposite of that. By embracing natality, you're embracing the unknown instead of sort of living your life by trying to make sure it doesn't come about, right? And trying to basically control things as much as possible. Very good. That's a really good insight. Yes?
Can you also say that humans have I don't know if I say, but you say that men have, they have that feeling where the fear causes them to idolize themselves. And I say that because, I'm trying to make it make sense. I say that because, for example, Louis XIV.
Good.
He nicknamed himself, or his court nicknamed him the Sun King.
Good.
Because he was scared of ending up like his father. He was scared of being a failure. So he idolized himself and immortalized himself by building Versailles, by building these lavish gardens, by idolizing his image, so that even when he passes on at 72, his name is still mentioned in these rooms centuries later. And I want to say the same for Ludwig II of Bavaria. I was watching a video about him yesterday. And he also he nicknamed himself the Moon King, in contrast to Louis XIV.
Really?
He wanted to immortalize himself as well. He built he built lavish castles in Germany. There's one castle that inspired the Disney castle that we see today in Disney World, Sleeping Beauty's castle. That's inspired by Bavaria. So it's like that fear of death, knowing that their time is coming. They want to immortalize themselves some way, somehow.
Yes.
By leaving something that we can still talk about.
Good. So the examples you've given are Ludwig of Bavaria and Louis XIV, and I think that those are really fitting examples. I guess the one I know a little bit more about would be Louis XIV. I'm going to have to, if you can send me the video you watched about Ludwig, that sounds really interesting. Like you pointed out, Louis XIV as a king is also shaped, right, by his experience of watching his king father. And his response to fear of death and to instability and political division and war is, as you said, to deify himself, to make a god out of himself. This is a human impulse that never goes away, right? And I think it's also, if we go back to the Socrates in Athens example, they're not saying that they're the same thing as the gods of the city, but they definitely see their identity and the gods of the city, that immortality being linked, right? So this turn to the theological as a way of maintaining control. And like you said, Louis XIV has this idea of, and he calls himself the Sun King, you know, he's going to outlive his mortal body, is the hope. And you can go back to Rome, right? And what happens with a lot of the Caesars, they say we become immortal. The first leader of Rome, Romulus, people say at that time what they believed is that he ascended into heaven as a god. Okay, so the fear of death, it doesn't just necessarily lead to systems of control and power, though it can and does, but also to this supreme human hubris of make me a god. I am a god, and that will stop my fear of death. That's an important consideration for Blood Meridian too. That's definitely something you want to have on the map, especially because the figure of Judge Holden, a lot of times, he is going to talk about control over the world, control of others' agency, and he's going to present himself as a type of mystical figure, a more than human figure with more than human powers. And he keeps talking about what he calls the god of war. And everything has to become aligned to the god of war. And he sees the kid in terms of the god of war. You guys are doing very well. Any other insights? The hero's journey, of course, has to do with being able to defeat fear. And one thing I'd point out is that in the hero's journey, the hero in the hero's journey is able to restore and to heal and basically give a new period of peace, of a new beginning. But in the hero's journey, like as we know it, a lot of times it leads to a renewal / new founding or new era, but it never ends with the hero becoming a god. Okay, the hero's journey, as it's sort of structured in Campbell's work and the work of others in literary studies and sociology and anthropology, the last step is not deification. And I think that's really interesting in light of our discussions. It's something to keep in mind. Even when they do restore order, even when they do heal their community and renew it, the next step isn't to become divine themselves. Like think about in Lord of the Rings, Frodo goes to this other land with the elves because he's been through so much. But he doesn't become a god. Aragorn becomes the king of this place with so much new promise. He doesn't become a god. In fact, the whole point of Aragorn is that he's going to die in a way, right? Because that's the contrast with his wife. He's mortal in a way that she isn't. It drives a lot of his character in the story. All right, so let's go ahead and we'll wrap this up.